this community as we gather together to remember and honor and celebrate the life of Cynthia Bozovich, the life that she shared with us, with this community. As I looked at the program today, David, thank you. I couldn't think of a better way to begin our time together than music by Vaughan Williams. And then something even greater happened when I realized that it was a hymn tune that Vaughan Williams had picked up from the old country and brought to us here in America. This was not planned. As I thought about Cynthia's life and what she contributed to this community, I realized there's an ancient story of a traveler in Europe in the Middle Ages who traveled around from town to town and came into a town and saw that there was some noisy activity going on in the middle of town. So he investigated. Looking around, you could see piles of stone, people with hammers and chisels, and a lot of work going on, a lot of noise going on. And he walked up to someone and said, "What are you doing?" And this person said, "Well, can't you see I'm breaking rock?" Yeah. Well, he looked around, saw somebody else that looked maybe a little bit more welcoming, and he walked over to this person and said, "Can you tell me what you're doing?" And this person said, "Oh yes." He put down his hammer for a second and he said, "We're building a building." And so the visitor looked around and he said, "Yeah," he could kind of see the outline of the building. And then he was curious about what it was. He saw another person working who actually was smiling, maybe whistling while they were working. He walked over to this person and said, "Excuse me, could you tell me what you're doing here?" And this person put down his hammer. He turned around and greeted the visitor and he said, "We are building a cathedral." Now he could pick out the shape of the building, and as the foundation was just beginning to be laid, and he realized, yeah, this is what a project, what a endeavor that this town is involved in. And as he watched a little longer, he saw someone over on the other side of the building operation who was not only whistling while they worked. This person seemed to be a magnet. Other people, when they took a break from their work or when they went to get supplies, always seemed to go by this person on their way to do whatever they were doing and by this person on the way back to their job. And so he wandered around and got over to that person. He said, "Excuse me, could you tell me what you're doing here?" And this person said, "We are building the center for this community, a cathedral, a place where we will gather the community together when babies are born, a place where we will gather the community together when people fall in love and get married, a place where people will gather together to celebrate the Lord's presence in our midst, and a place that we will gather together when people die so that we as a community can celebrate their lives and encourage each other." That is what we're doing here. And the reason I remembered that story, which I hadn't thought of for a long time, is that it's my experience that Cynthia has been that kind of a person in this community who saw much more than breaking rocks, than building a building, even a cathedral, even a church, but saw the community itself alive in the space. I want to give thanks to God as we begin today for putting in all of our minds different visions of what this community we call the church can be, this body of Christ, this place where love emerges from the kingdom of heaven into the space of this earth. We celebrate and we grieve together today. God, I thank you that we grieve, but not as those who we spend this time in remembrance and honor today. Bless us all. In Jesus' name.
This is Cynthia's life history. Cynthia Helen McGee was born on December 26, 1937, in Houston, Texas, during a rainstorm so strong her father had to carry the doctor through the running water into the house. Her parents were Laura May Berry and Henry McGee. She was the middle daughter between Anna, Laura Martin, and Melanie Henriette Reddy. When she was 6 years old, they moved to College Place, Washington, and she began attending the Adventist schools by Walla Walla College. For her junior and senior years of high school, she attended Auburn Academy, where she was involved in music and worked in the kitchen. After graduation from Auburn, she returned to College Place and attended the Walla Walla College as a voice major. Now, in the spring of her freshman year, she met Joseph Bozovich. He's an engineering major, a good-looking one, a good catch. They dated for 5 weeks before being engaged. Wow, Joe. Whenever you tell this family story, I can't imagine anybody convincing Cynthia to make a major decision within 5 months, let alone 5 weeks. They were married on August 26, 1956. And they've been married for 67 years. A remarkable journey. They immediately moved back east. Now, my understanding, if I remember the stories correctly, that was part of your honeymoon. You were moving back east for a job. And on your way, that was your honeymoon. Is that right? You were heading back east because you had a job working for General Electric and lived in several places such as Ohio, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New York, and California, sometimes as short as 3 months. Finally, though, you settled in Denver in 1960. In 1957, their first daughter, Carrie Diane, was born in Massachusetts. And in 1959, their second daughter, Shelley Annette, was born in California. Thank goodness for me. Their arrival in Denver coincided with the opening of this church, Denver South Seventh-day Adventist Church, where Cynthia was involved over the years with music, Sabbath school class, flowers, decorating, and community services. She and her dear friend, Joy Lynn Campbell-Uckel, spearheaded the effort to install this Zimmer pipe organ. As chair of the fundraising committee, and along with her dear friend, Eva Jo Touts, who was at that time the school board chair, she was instrumental in combining fundraising for this organ and the new gymnasium at Mile High Academy, right down the street. Both projects were completed on time in 1984 paid fully through their joint efforts. Now, many of you know that Cynthia is a very generous person with strangers. She loves to talk to the flight attendants on airplanes, or the waitress or waiter whenever we went to a restaurant, or talking to the clerk at the grocery store, or maybe at the hardware store, or at the lumber store. Well, this led to several offers of jobs because of her skills in various areas of expertise, including sprinkler repairs, painting, and wallpaper, and of course, the family story about her job opportunity at the water department. When her girls were young, she went to opportunity school and studied interior decorating, while expanding on skills her father had taught her, such as being a painter, being a carpenter, even being a house builder. She went on to make her own draperies and upholstery furniture. Perhaps the most important treasure that was part of her life was her children and her grandchildren. In Mile High Academy, she was always involved in her daughter's classrooms as a volunteer and as a room mother. And when she was taking care of her grandchildren, she was always sharing new experiences and stories with them about her love of music, the arts. She loved to travel, and boy, did she like to eat. Cynthia is survived by her husband, Joseph Forsythe Bozovich, her daughters, Carrie Diana Bozovich, and Shelley Annette Bozovich Boyson, her son-in-law, me, her grandson, Trevor, Joseph Boyson, and his beautiful wife, Gabrielle Jacqueline Boyson, granddaughter, Madeline Claire Boyson, sister Melanie McGee Redding, nephew Gregory Martin, and nieces Elizabeth Jo Redding Anderson and Sarah Redding Peters.
Thank you so much for being here in honor of my grandmother. In moments like these, I turn to my favorite writers, and I have chosen a handful of poems, some for her, some for me, some for my family, and some I hope for you. The first is Lucille Clifton's Blessing the Boats. May the tide that is entering even now the lip of our understanding carry you out beyond the face of fear. May you kiss the wind, then turn from it, certain that it will love your back. May you open your eyes to water, water waiting forever, and may you in your innocence sail through this to that. The second comes from one of my favorite novels by Thornton Wilder, The Bridge of San Luis Rey. And it comes from the very last chapter of the book. But soon we shall die, and all memory of those five will have left the earth, and we ourselves shall be loved for a while and forgotten. But the love will have been enough. All of those impulses of love return to the love that made them. Even memory is not necessary for love. There is a land of the living and a land of the dead, and the bridge is love, the only survival, the only meaning. The next is Mary Oliver. Blackwater Woods. Look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light, are giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds. And every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. Every year, everything I have ever learned in my lifetime leads back to this. The fires and the black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes, to let it go, to let it go. Next is from W.S. Merwin, to Paula in late spring. Let me imagine that we will come again when we want to, and it will be spring. We will be no older than we ever were. The worn griefs will have eased like the early cloud through which the morning slowly comes to itself, and the ancient defenses against the dead will be done with and left to the dead at last. The light will be as it is now in the garden that we have made here these years together of our long evenings and astonishment. And finally, another Mary Oliver. I have just said something ridiculous to you, and in response, your glorious laughter. These are the days the sun is swimming back to the east, and the light on the water gleams as never, it seems, before. I can't remember every spring. I can't remember everything. So many years. Are the morning kisses the sweetest, or the evenings, or the in-betweens? All I know is that thank you should appear somewhere. So just in case I can't find the perfect place, thank you. Thank you.
There are at least two reasons that we were able to enjoy Lisa's song without a microphone. One of them is that she has taken the trouble to develop that voice, that marvelous voice, so that it projects. The other is that Cynthia Bozovich had something to do with the design of the front of this church that made it a marvelous place for musicians and for those of us who like to sit and listen to the music and to be able to hear and appreciate what they're doing. What you see when you look at the front of this church comes in a significant way from Cynthia's vision. When I came here with my family in 1983, Denver South Church was the most happening church in the Adventist community in Colorado. It was the biggest church, but that wasn't why it was the most happening church. It was the most happening church because it had the best children's programs around. It had the best, liveliest adult Sabbath school. And even a class that met in the upper room that had its own name, Fulcrum, long before that name was adopted by a fringe group. I think there were two churches in Colorado that had a special class that was designed for adult spiritual development, where people could ask questions rather than simply look up answers, and where they could consider different ways of understanding the opportunity that God gives us to live in this community and in this world. It was in this group that I first met the Bozoviches. Cynthia and Joe were there with their young adult daughters, Carrie and Shelley, when one or more of them were off somewhere helping lead a division somewhere else in the Sabbath school program. Might have been downstairs with the smaller kids. Cynthia was upstairs sometimes with the early teens in the other upper room. I quickly discovered that this whole family was actively involved, contributing to the community of the life of the church. contributing to rich discussions, not only in this group, but among people who had a vision for what this church could be, how it was a light in the community. I also quickly appreciated their involvement in the music life of the church, which was certainly the most notable in the area. Now, I haven't mentioned Michael yet because Michael was not part of the family yet. Michael was my cousin's roommate sharing a house up in Louisville. Cynthia was altruistic. She cared about the experience of the community in the church and the experience of the people, members and visitors who came to this place, which she deeply appreciated as a sacred space. She had what I call the Steve Jobs focus. You may remember when Steve Jobs first introduced the first iPod, that personal, portable music player. He didn't talk about how much memory it had. He didn't talk in bytes and gigabytes and all that technical jargon. He said, I want to introduce to you 1,000 songs in your pocket. It was the experience of the user that was Jobs' obsession. And it was Cynthia's focus to think about how people experience this place when they come in to worship, when they come in for a special program, when they come in as a visitor, when they come in as a member of the community who comes week after week after week. I studied Steve Jobs' presentation methods after that. I thought, wow, what a marvelous way. Totally different from the rest of the technology world of introducing a new product. And so I studied his presentation methods. I discovered that he always started with one single question. What kind of experience do I want people to have? And he built his whole presentation around that question. And I believe that Cynthia had that same kind of focus on the experience of the people who came into this place. She did it in highly visible ways. I mentioned the way the church looks up front. Not only the design of the building, the hardwood floor, which helps project the sound of the musicians, the angle of the benches for the choir. There was originally a design drawn up with straight pews, just like the rest of the church. Cynthia went like, that's not going to work. We need to have the choir focusing as if we're huddled together, like we like each other, like we like this music and we're sharing it, and we're having a good time doing this, and we are a community of music sharing this gift with the whole congregation. And so this is what we have, because she saw that. It's highly visible. She did it in less visible ways also. No small thing escaped her eye. Whether it was the flowers at the welcome desk in addition to the ones up here in front, flowers in the restrooms, flowers in other places in the church that you might not expect. The guest experience was her focus. And then, of course, there are the necessary things. She would be here early on Sabbath morning, before other people were here, making sure that every stall in the restroom had an appropriate amount of tissue. Now, we don't like to talk about things like that and think about things like that, but that is an important part of the guest experience, of the visitor experience, and it's the important part of the experience of being this community together. She wanted the place to provide a welcome, as much like the welcome she would provide in her own home as possible. Most of all, the organ. Before there was the organ, Denver South was a venue for great sacred and classical music. Partly, the architecture of this church itself, this building, lends itself to music. The hard surfaces keep the sound moving. This building has the longest sound time decay of any Adventist church in this part of the country. It's a great place for music. And Cynthia accentuated that as she helped design what's up front here. The architecture, though, it's unfortunately limited in some other ways. It doesn't foster conversation quite as much as like this would if it were back here too. The tiny foyer doesn't provide as much space for conversation either, but it is a magnificent music place. And it just, as it makes musicians sound good, it just seemed natural that this should be the place where a pipe organ should come into our musical and worship experience. We've had some amazing musical experiences in this place because of this vision. Do some of you actually remember when the newest Seventh-day Adventist hymnal was introduced? We had a series. We had a whole sequence of events in this church that celebrated, introduced the new hymns, and we shared them together. And we learned to sing to the accompaniment and leadership of a pipe organ. Cynthia was a planner and organizer, and she's what Quinn Studer, one of my mentors, called a fire starter in a good way. A fire starter is somebody who gathers the things together, lights the match, gets the fire going, that then becomes the focus of attention of the community. A place where we can tell stories around the fire. A place where we can sing around the fire. Now, when someone steps out to do something like this, it doesn't happen without opposition. There were people who thought, oh, that's a lot of money. Pipe organ? Couldn't that be better spent in the mission field somewhere? Others in the community thought the need for a full-size gymnasium at Mile High Academy was a higher priority. So with these competing priorities vying for people's attention and money, there were people starting to choose up sides. Now here's an interesting thing. Cynthia, instead of just pushing harder for the organ project, shifted to third-way thinking, or some people call it the middle-way thinking. She said, let's make this a combined project. Raise the money for both of these things together. People, some of them shook their heads and said, no, that's too much. Cynthia said, it's not too much. This community can do it. And it did. Her dream prevailed and succeeded. Another way that Cynthia made a difference was in expanding people's spiritual and life experience. She wanted teenagers not just to hear about the world of spirituality from textbooks and from other people's reports. She wanted them to know what it was like to go to a Jewish synagogue, to go to another church of a Christian denomination, so that they would understand firsthand what those people's experience was. She helped bring the first Seder service to Denver South Church, which surprised many people as they discovered how much of our communion service is built on the foundation of the Seder service, which is a Passover remembrance. And it was the elements of the Passover meal which Jesus used as he established the communion service. Cynthia has had a big tent vision of the community of the church. She welcomed and supported gays, lesbians, and the expanding LGBTQI and whatever other we may add as we understand the complexities of life better. In spite of the deep ambivalence of the Adventist institution about this, she understood that all people are loved by God, and that we as the church are the place where this love is to be manifest in the community, to be like a magnet to bring people to the place of learning more about the life of God and his people. She understood partly because of her own rough childhood, but partly also by directly observing carefully, with empathy and love, how deeply rejection hurts. How rejection stunts the spiritual growth of people who are judged rather than welcomed by their faith community. How the development and sense of belonging in the world is powerful. See, we